What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another retro Yu-Gi-Oh video, and in this video we're going to be covering a pretty interesting deck from Fiber format, which I call Recruiter Swap. The reason I call it this is because we're playing 6 Recruiters, Mystic Tomatoes, and Giant Rats, as well as 2 Creature Swap. Creature Swap is a pretty powerful spell that is on the semi-limited list for Fiber format, and hopefully this deck can sort of show why this card might be semi-limited, as there are some very powerful combinations you can do with it. For instance, if you have like a Mystic Tomato or a Giant Rat, you can creature swap that to your opponent, take your opponent's most powerful monster, and then attack over whatever monster you gave them. In addition, it has synergies with some other cards as well, things like Sangan and Witch, of course, but also things like Sinister Serpent. You know, if you're getting back Sinister Serpent to your hand every standby phase, then you can easily summon it out, creature swap it with an opponent's monster, and attack over it. So I feel like this deck has some very interesting synergies with creature swap, and I wanted to show off those synergies in some games. So we'll have to dive into the games themselves to see how exactly that turned out for us. But before we do, here's the card by card. So we've got 2 Bazoo, 2 Kaiku, and 2 Gemini Elf, the beater triangle. You still do want these, as these are your major aggressive force. We've got a Jinzo here, as you know, you're going to be bringing out recruiters fairly often, and so you'll likely have tribute fodder on field for a Jinzo. I was considering maybe using a Dark Ruler Hades here instead, but the way I figure it is if you've creature swapped an opponent, like a Tomato or a Giant Rat, they could potentially crash that monster into a Hades and prevent you from getting the monster off of it. So I feel like Hades is better in the side here in case you're up against a strategy like this as well. There are some other side deck cards that you can include here, which we will discuss later, but I do want to mention the Hades in the side for that reason. For the other monsters, we've got our Giant Rat targets, Exiled Force, and Injection Fairy Lily, as well as our Mystic Tomato targets, Witch of the Black Forest, and Sangan here. We've got the Sinister Serpent because of the creature swap combo that I mentioned earlier. Also, it's a great discard off of Charity. We've got a Yata Garasu because I figure that if we are able to take our opponent's monsters with creature swap and get out other monsters as well, then maybe Yata could be a good pick here. Also, we'll likely have field presence given that we're playing so many recruiters. So if we are able to get that field presence, potentially beat over our opponent's monsters, then we can likely get off the Yata lock fairly consistently. Not sure exactly whether this will happen in the future. I will say I don't think I got off the Yata lock in any of the games that I played with this card here, but it is something to consider, and I do think it's worth playing in the deck. And lastly, for the monsters, we've got a Fiber Jar, which is kind of a centralizing card in this format. I do think it's very good, and I do think it's worth including for that reason. For the spells, we've got Change of Heart, Confiscation, 2 Creature Swap, Darkhold, 2 Graceful Charity, Harpy's Feather Duster, Monster Reborn, Triple MST, a Painful Choice, Pot of Greed, Raigeki, Snatch Steal, and Forceful Sentry. I don't really think that any of these cards really need much introduction, except for Creature Swap, which I've already explained. All the other cards here are just individually very powerful. For the traps, we've got a Call of the Haunted, Imperial Order, and a Mirror Force, and that's it, because we didn't have room to include more. For the side deck, we've got a Cannon Soldier in case we are facing more of a Stally deck and think that this is a good card to include. We can also pair it with the Scapegoat in the side deck if we want to get a lot of damage off really quickly. Also, Cannon Soldier is a card to bring off Tomato. We've got the Hades, as I mentioned earlier. A Magician of Faith, this is more here for me experimenting a bit with the layout of the deck. I could see this being good at potentially getting back something like Creature Swap, and also if you are able to like flip it up on your turn, like your opponent didn't attack into it, it could be a good thing to creature swap to your opponent, as it's kind of useless after that point. We've also got a Delinquent Duo in case we're going first. We can bring this in. We've got a Heavy Storm, 2 Noblemen of Crossout, a Ceasefire, 3 Jar of Greed, and 3 Torrential Tribute. Now, with this side deck, I kind of do just have things here to experiment with. Like the Jars of Greed are definitely here to experiment with a bit. But I do think the other cards do have a purpose, like Torrential Tribute can be good against aggro decks. Ceasefire and the Nox can be good against a flip-focused deck. So I do think that this side deck isn't a bad place to start if you are sort of testing out this deck for yourself. But I do think that there are probably some better cards that can go in this side deck, which again, I'll discuss later on in the video. But now that we've covered the deck, let's dive into some games and see how it actually works out. Okay, we've got a game against Zawarudo, Dark Armed God. I think this is the first time I've featured them on the channel, although I may have featured them on the channel in the past. Either way, they're an active member of the Discord, so always a pleasure to have them on. We are going to win the rock, paper, scissors, so we will be able to go first, which is pretty nice. This deck kind of does want to go first, because if you can start by just setting a recruiter, that's pretty decent. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like we have any recruiters in the opener, but we do have Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity, so that will hopefully get us there. We draw 2, draw into Yata Garasu, which is very nice to know that we could potentially set up the Yata lock later. We draw into a creature swap here, but unfortunately we don't have any monster that we'd want a creature swap. Maybe the Yata, because we summon out Yata, creature swap it, and then Yata returns to hand at the end of the turn. So that's a neat combo. But I feel like the other cards in our hand are much more powerful. So I am going to discard the creature swap and a Mystical Space Typhoon. I maybe should have kept it in hand for the Yata play that I mentioned, but I think ultimately this is a good move. We're going to bring out a Ghost Destroyer, set a Mystical Space Typhoon, and pass back to our opponent. Opponent's just going to set 2 and then activate a Delinquent Duo here, which is a bit worrying. We do have some very powerful cards in hand, so it'd be unfortunate if they hit them. They hit the Change of Heart here, and we're going to think about what to discard, and we are just going to pitch this Yata. This makes me happy that I discarded the creature swap earlier, because creature swap plus Yata kind of is a 2-card combo, and something like the Delinquent Duo can really disrupt that. Luckily, we were able to pitch the other part of that combo there, and it looks like they don't have any monsters, so we can just get in for 1800 here. We're going to attack in with the Kaiku. No need to play into Torrential if they've got it. They're going to flip up Gravity Bind. We've got a Mystical Space Typhoon. That Gravity Bind is a bit worrying, as it means that they might be on a stall deck, and we did discard another one of our Mystical Space Typhoons, so we're in a bit of a tough spot, but we do have the Injecting Fairy Lily in hand, which is a level 3 monster in a worst-case scenario. So we're able to attack in for 1800, banish those 2 cards from grave, and then main phase 2, we're just going to fire this Confiscation to see what they're up to. And that will indeed go through, so we get to look at their hand here. And it looks like they're on a 7-card fish, which means that they likely are on a Legendary Ocean style of deck. Legendary Ocean is a field spell that reduces the level of your water monsters by 1, so it can play potentially nice with the Gravity Bind there. But I do think that the card that we want to get rid of here is probably the Snatch Steal. With the Kaiku or the 7-card fish, they'd have to attack into our Kaiku to make that worthwhile. So I think that the Snatch Steal is the right choice to make here. I also think that this hand tells us that the last card set is a Torrential Tribute. Our opponent wanted us to commit more into the board. They Torrential didn't bring out an 1800 beater, because otherwise I feel like they probably would have just attacked into our Kaiku with one of their monsters, or just set one as a bluff. But either way here, we do take the Snatch Steal, and we know their hand now. We're going to pass back to them, and they're going to think about this for a bit and just pass back to us. That tells me that they definitely have a Torrential Tribute here. We're going to hit in for 1800 with the Kaiku, banish out that Snatch Steal, and then main phase 2, we're just going to set this Witch, because the Witch does play into Torrential very nicely. So I feel fine doing this. They're going to go for a Graceful Charity here, and they'll draw 3, discard a fish, and discard a Kaiku. So now we don't really know anything in their hand anymore. They've got a Snatch Steal, though. That's a bit worrying. They'll attack into our set here. It's the Witch. We'll get a search. And we're going to grab an Exiled Force just in case anything comes up. They're going to go for a Reborn here. And they're going to bring back... And they're going to think about what to bring back. They're going to bring back a Kaiku of their own. It's a bit of an interesting play here. Then they're then going to tribute off this Jinzo. Okay. So they've set up their board to be pretty aggressive. I'm not sure necessarily why they didn't bring out these before battle. Maybe they were worried about like Cyberjar, which does make sense. But yeah, so they've got a pretty intimidating board state, but I think we can clear it pretty well here. The question is, do we want to clear it? We could just set the Fiber Jar. We're doing pretty good on damage here. We could also summon out the Injection Fairy Lily, attack in to the Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer. We have enough life points to activate Injection Fairy Lily a couple times, so we don't really need to worry too much about what they've got, especially if we are correct in our read that their last back row is a Torrential Tribute here. So we're going to think about this for quite a bit. And we could also just clear their board with the Exiled Force. But yeah, we are just going to go for the Lily here. We're actually going to hit over the Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer instead of the Jinzo. Firstly, this is more damage. Gets them below the 2,000 threshold in case they do have something like Change of Heart or Snatch Steal. They can't really use our Injection Fairy Lily to full effect. Although, I mean, they have used up Change of Heart and Snatch Steal, so it's not really as much of a risk here. But it's just good to know. And also, you know, we can always reborn a monster here, bring back the Witch just in case they do have something to clear this board, or to clear our Lily, I guess. I don't know. I really think that we probably could have just saved the reborn for later, but I don't think that bring back the Witch is a bad thing. They're going to activate Cold Wave here, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't affect us since we don't have any spells or traps, but it's an interesting tech at least. We're going to bring out this Exiled Force, tribute it off for their set. They've got a Witch, which is quite unfortunate, but they add a Mother Grizzly, which could potentially turn out pretty good for us here. Our opponent's just going to set one and pass back to us, and we have the read that they do have the Mother Grizzly set. We could fire the Forceful Sentry first to try and confirm that. But I think it's fine just getting aggressive here. We can leave the Jinzo face up on the field alive and potentially kill them here either way. We're going to attack into the Grizzly. They do bring out another Grizzly, which will be the end of the game because we can attack into it with the Lily. But even if they didn't bring out the other Grizzly, we could have just attacked over the Jinzo with the Elf and then attacked indirectly with the Injection Fairy Lily. If their set was something like Mirror Force, then that would really punish us here. But we've got Forceful Sentry to deal with their last card in hand, so they'd be down to no cards. And we do have the strong read that set is a Torrential Tribute. So I feel like that would be the end of the game. As is, though, this is just lethal if we attack over the Grizzly with the Lily. And that will indeed be the end of the game. And they did indeed have this Torrential here. The last card in their hand was a Solemn Judgment, so that would have also been useless here. So we feel pretty good about how that game went there. Unfortunately, though, we didn't draw into any of our recruiters. So, like, kind of unfortunate there. I mean, I guess we could have searched one with the Witch, but there wasn't really a point to it at that point in the game since we were just getting aggressive and we could have easily just, gotten rid of any problem cards that they had with the Exiled Force. So I feel like we played that game pretty well, and it was kind of unfortunate that we didn't get to see the recruiters in action. If I'd kept the creature swap in hand, we may have been able to see the creature swap Yata Garasu combo in action. But I mean, I do think that it was right to discard the creature swap there, as it was a 2-card combo, and our opponent did have the duo, so, nothing we really could have done there. We are going to be going second here, as we did win game 1, so our opponent's going to try and go first here. Our opponent's just going to set one and pass back to us, and we feel pretty good about that. We actually do have a recruiter in hand here, which is pretty nice. We're going to Pot of Greed, though, see what we get. Ooh, that's pretty good. We're going to bring in a Gemini Elf. Change of Heart their set, because we're just getting super aggressive here, and also we do want to see what they've got there. We don't necessarily want to let them get a search. And we've got the Fiber Jar in hand, which is why we're going so aggressive, because if things do sort of turn against us, we can always set the Fiber Jar and feel pretty good about that. We've also got this Mirror Force to stop any aggressive pressure that they may have. Unfortunately, they do have a Jinzo here, so that will stop that. They'll attack into the Gemini Elf. We'll take 500, and they'll pass back to us. We draw Graceful Charity, which is pretty good. We'll draw 3 with that. And we're going to think about exactly what to discard here. We're actually going to discard the Painful Choice, and that is kind of a weird decision. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. But the way I figured is we want to keep these recruiters in hand to keep getting aggressive. We've got the Raigeki to clear the Jinzo, and we're just going to keep going for an aggressive push. There's nothing we really need right now. The Harpy's Feather Duster can be good to clear away back row, so I feel pretty decent about this. We're going to bring out that Mystic Tomato, Raigeki away their Jinzo, and attack in for 1400 here. We could have also done this a different way. We could have summoned out Giant Rat, hit into Jinzo, brought out Lily, and then attacked over the Jinzo that way. However, I feel like, that's potentially going a bit too all in on life points and sort of neutralizing our life point advantage here. And again, we do have the Fiber Jar to recycle our deck in case things do go poorly. So I feel good about doing this. You can also do the Giant Rat play later and potentially win the game that way. Our opponent's going to set 2 and pass back to us. We draw Yata Garasu, which is very nice. We could bring out the Yata Garasu and just try and draw lock our opponent here. But what we're going to do instead is we're going to start with a Harpy's Feather Duster just in case they've got something to deal with our tomato. And they're actually going to bring out a Jinzo, which is a bit unfortunate here. We're going to bring out this Giant Rat, and we want to do the Giant Rat until Lily play this turn. I have the read that their set is likely a Recruiter or something. So we're going to attack into it first with the tomato, so that way we can crash into the rat in case our opponent brings out another Mother Grizzly. Unfortunately, we get majorly punished here, though, as that's a 4-star Ladybug of Doom, which is not a card I was expecting, but it can be a very good side deck option against this sort of deck, as all the recruiters are level 4. So that really punishes us. We're in a really bad spot now. Our opponent can get super aggressive here and neutralize the damage advantage that we had just gotten. So, yeah, we're feeling really bad about this. I mean, maybe we could have done this differently. If we had just attacked into the Giant Rat with the Jinzo beforehand and then brought out the Lily, attacked over the Jinzo, then attacked into the 4-star Ladybug of Doom with the tomato, I feel like we would have been in a much better spot. But, I mean, I really was not expecting 4-star Ladybug of Doom. And I really suffer for it here. We're going to drop down really low. Our opponent's going to take 2 of our very powerful cards from grave, so we can't even really recycle that well with the Fiber Jar. And they're going to pass back to us. We draw Injection Fairy Lily, which is now useless to us as we're less than 2,000 life points. We just got to set this Fiber Jar and pray, really. Unfortunately, they've got a Swords of Revealing Light in main phase 1, so that will flip up the Fiber Jar now, and if our opponent draws any monster off this Fiber Jar, we just do lose the game. So, that was game two. I mean, it's kind of unfortunate that it turned out this way. I think there were some things we could have potentially done differently here if we had sequenced the attacks with the tomato and the rat a bit differently. Then maybe things could have turned out better for us here. But unfortunately we didn't, and that could just be my inexperience with the deck talking. Um, but yeah, it's kind of unfortunate that it worked out that way. Opponent's going to open with a confiscation here, which is potentially a good sign, as if they're doing this now, it could just mean they're fishing for a Karibo, but could also mean that they don't really have much in their own hand. They're going to go for a delinquent duo here, hitting that tomato, and we're just going to pitch the fiber jar, as fiber jar is way too slow at this point in the game to really affect things. And they're just going to set 2 and activate a legendary ocean pass. Wow, they got really unlucky there, and their bad luck may be our good luck here. We draw Gemini Elf, and I think we could potentially wrap this thing up. We're going to fire a Monster Reborn to start, because they do know about the Reborn. If they've got IO here, they can stop this. If they've got Torrential Tribute, they can deal with whatever we bring back. We do bring back the tomato just to play around Bottomless Trap Hole a little bit. But they do indeed have the torrential here, so that will clear the tomato. Makes sense to activate it there. Unfortunately, we do have the Gemini Elf here, and that will be able to attack in. And yep, all they've got is Call the Haunted with no monsters in grave. So that will be the end of the game. And wow, we got majorly lucky in this game too. But I do think that if we'd played this game too a bit differently, we could have potentially won. We did go super aggressive here. Maybe if we hadn't gone really aggressive, we would have been in a less dangerous spot later on. Also, again, if we had sequenced the attack on the Ladybug turn a bit differently, I think things could have turned out a little bit differently for us as well here, and we could have been in a much better position for later. However, we did still win this game, and it was a bit unfortunate because we didn't get to show off really the recruiter swap combo. But so that's why we played another game with this deck. And just to try and pull off that combo and see how good it is. So we actually did play another game with Zoerudo Dark Arm God a bit after they had changed up their deck a little bit. But let's dive into that and see how this deck does. Okay, we've got another game against Zoerudo Dark Arm God. I know I'm butchering the Dio stand name, but yeah, I mean, at least I get the reference. This is a great opener. We've got Giant Rat and a creature swap, and so we're feeling pretty good about that. We do draw another Giant Rat, which isn't the best, but it's ultimately fine. We've got a great creature swap combo here, so I'm very excited for that. They're going to go for a Graceful Charity, discard 2, discarding the Injection Fairy Lily, which is a bit interesting. They're going to set 2, likely playing around Morphing Jar, and hit into our Sangan. With that Sangan, we'll pick up a Witch, as that will let us get aggressive later on. And they're just going to pass back to us. We feel pretty good about this. We could just go for the Giant Rat combo here, and we are indeed going to try and Giant Rat into Creature Swap here. We're going to bring that out, and unfortunately, they've got a Solemn Judgment. Wow, okay, yeah, that's really bad for us. Yeah, I mean, we could Snap Steal the 7-card fish and get in for some damage here. I don't really like that play that much, as it'll be a net 800 damage total, because, they'll gain 1,000 next turn. Also, they've got a way to deal with the Snap Steal, then that's pretty bad. So yeah, I'll save Snap Steal here. They can potentially get pretty aggressive here, but it looks like they're just going to summon out, or set out a monster and then attack in with 1,800. Unfortunately, that makes our creature swap play a lot worse here. We are going to change of heart their set in case it's like a Magician of Faith or something, but our opponent's got Imperial Order on top of that. So even if, we had managed to get a rat to stick, they had Imperial Order, and that would have shut us down anyways. We're going to think about exactly what to do here. We're just going to set this Witch and pass. I mean, we could have set the Rat and passed, because that way if they attack into it, we can get out a Lily, and just have that on board. But I feel fine with the Witch here. They've got another Witch, so they'll bring that out. They'll also pay the 7 off the Imperial Order, which is fine by us. They're going to flip up a Serpent as well. They're going to attack into our set with the Witch first, and unfortunately for them, it is our Witch. So they'll drop down to 3,200 there. They'll attack in to our Witch with the 7-card fish, and we'll search out a Bazoo to potentially get in a fair amount of damage here. Opponent's going to set 1 and pass back to us, and we could actually go for an almost lethal line here. If we summon out Giant Rat, attack into the 7-card fish, bring out Lily and attack into Serpent, that gets them down to 100 life points, which is so close. But I feel like, we can just go for the safer play here instead, especially given that we drew another creature swap. And if they do let the Imperial Order lapse, then we can creature swap Giant Rat. So I feel pretty good about that. We are going to bring out this Bazoo, and we're going to banish 3 from grave. bumping it up to 2,500. We'll attack in to the Sinister Serpent there. They've got a Mirror Force, unfortunately. And maybe this is a sign I should have set the Giant Rat or the Tomato just to play it a bit defensively. But I mean, we would have had to deal with the Mirror Force either way at some point, so I don't really think it matters too much here. A bit unfortunate there. We're going to pass back to our opponent. They're going to let the Imperial Order lapse, which is a bit worrying. They've got Heavy Storms that will deal with our Snatch Steal there. They've got Reborn, and that should be the end of the game, especially when they bring back an Injection Fairy Lily. Now, before we go into the siding process here, I do want to mention that I do think this game does a pretty good job of showing off some of the deck's flaws. The creature swap play is a bit fragile. I mean, even if they hadn't Salamandar Rat, they had Imperial Order for it. Also, when our opponent had the Sinister Serpent on field, the creature swap play would have been really bad, as they would have just given up the Sinister Serpent. So while the creature swap play is good in sort of simplified game states, when your opponent doesn't have many monsters on field, it can get really bad when your opponent's able to stick a board like this. And I also think that, you know, we drew a bunch of the recruiters over the course of the game, and drawing the recruiters on their own aren't very good. I mean, maybe we could have played this a bit differently, like if we had just set the recruiters instead of setting like this Sangan or the Witch turn 1 and later on in the game. That would have thinned out our deck, getting more recruiters. But I do feel like the plays that we made were pretty good, and we were trying to save our recruiters for something like creature swap play later. So I don't necessarily think it was the worst to set the Sangan and the Witch. In addition, I do want to say that, you know, there probably is going to be a learning curve for this deck, so maybe we could have won this game if we had played it differently and were more experienced with it. But these are just my initial thoughts after playing with it. So this will indeed be the end of the game. 1,800, 2,900, 3,200, and then the last 3,400 there. So we will indeed lose that one. And yeah, we're going to go into game 2. I don't think we changed too much about the deck because I feel like we're already in a pretty good spot. We may have added in the duo, but unclear. We will just start by setting the Sangan, passing back to our opponent. The same play that we did before, but the reason we're doing this time is because we do have a Graceful Charity in hand. So if they hit into the Sangan, we get a Serpent. We Graceful Charity, discard the Serpent. Feels pretty good about that. Our opponent's going to open with Pot of Greed, set to summon Asura Priest, and that is a very interesting tech against this sort of recruiter strategy. And it makes me very glad we didn't set a Tomato here, as that would have really handily dealt with this board. But as is, we've got this Sangan, so we'll be able to get a search off that, searching out this Serpent. And at the end of the turn, that Asura Priest will return to hand, so we can potentially get aggressive with a Kaiku here. Unfortunately, that Asura Priest does sort of invalidate some of our recruiters. We go for a Graceful Charity maybe to pitch a Serpent and like an extraneous Tomato, but our opponent does have an Imperial Order for that. So a bit unfortunate. We will be able to attack in with the Kaiku here, banish that Pot of Greed from their graveyard, pass back to them. They're going to let the Imperial Order lapse. They go for a Dark Hole here to clear the Kaiku, bring out a 7-card fish, and attack in for 18 here. They're going to pass back to us. We draw Forceful Sentry, which is pretty decent. We're going to fire that. They've got a Solemn, though, for that. So you know, that will stop that play from going through, unfortunately. We're just going to set this Giant Rat here. And if they do bring out a Asura Priest, we can bring out a Lily and potentially stop that from going through. Opponent's going to go for a Graceful Charity here, discarding a Serpent and a Magician of Faith there. They're going to set one attack in to our Giant Rat. And since they set one first, we are just going to bring out an Exiled Force because we want to pop whatever monster they might have set here. I figure if they had like a Sangan or a Witch, they would have just summoned it to attack. So I do feel like that set is something, especially given that they discarded a Magician of Faith. It could be like another Magician of Faith or something like that. So I do feel fine just bringing out the Exiled Force, tripping it off for their Faith, which is very, very good. They won't be able to get back that Graceful or the Dark Hole there. And then we're going to think about exactly what to do here. We could potentially Reborn that Exiled Force, treat it off for the 7-card fish. We also could just go for lethal here. If we summon out the Giant Rat, Reborn out the Kaiku, we can attack our Giant Rat into their 7-card fish, bring out Injection Fairy Lily, attack our Kaiku into their 7-card fish to clear it, and then attack directly with Injection Fairy Lily for game. However, I don't really want to do this just in case their set is something like Mirror Force. It's very unlikely, given that, you know, they didn't stop our Kaiku attack earlier. But it is a possibility. So I don't want to go all in here. I will still do the Injection Fairy Lily play here. as again, this will drop them down to below 2,000, so I don't really have to worry about, them taking Lily and then going all in with it. But it is a bit of a risky spot. We are at 3,800, and maybe I should have just gone for the lethal line here, just betting that it wasn't a Mirror Force. And, maybe that was the right play because they do have Mystical Space Typhoon to snipe this Monster Reborn that we had set as a bluff. So a bit worrying here. They're just going to set 2 and pass back to us. Call of the Haunted is pretty good here. It gives us a bit of insulation. We are just going to try going for game here, though, attacking him with the tomato. Then we'll attack in directly with this Injection Fairy Lily, and this should be the end of the game. They've got Call of the Haunted, but nothing in their graveyard can actually withstand a Lily hit, as that will be over 1,500 no matter what. They can't actually bring back a Sura Priest as well because, it's a spirit, can't be special summoned. They will bring back the 7-card fish here, but it won't actually matter in the end here. So that will be the end of game 2. And they revealed that they had an Injection Fairy Lily and a Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer in hand there. But that was a bit worrying because it shows that they do have things in the side to deal with the Recruiter strategy. I mean, we saw that a bit with the 7-card fish in the first match we played against them, but a Sura Priest really is tough to deal with this deck. It doesn't really disrupt the creature swap combo as much, although it kind of can because it returns to hand. But it can be really bad for our recruiters. So it's something good to consider here. At this point in the game, we might actually consider siding out of one set of our recruiters in the creature swaps. But given that I am showing off how this deck can do, and I haven't really gotten to show the combo yet. I mean, I kind of did because I showed it fail. But, I wanted to keep the deck as is to potentially, hopefully, get that creature swap combo in play here. So we keep the deck largely as is. We are going to go into game 3 here. And let's see how we do. We are going to be going second because our opponent did lose game 2 there. This is a pretty good opener, but they do have the Delinquent Duo here, which is kind of unfortunate. And they hit one of the best cards in our hand, Painful Choice. I mean, that saves us a bit of thinking later, I guess, so that's nice. But we are just going to pitch this Bazoo here. We've got a Witch to search out another beater from our deck later. And without the Painful Choice, we don't avoid to stack our graveyard as much, so a bit worrying. We do draw into Giant Rat, which is pretty decent. We're just going to bring in this Witch and attack into their set. I mean, there are some things that punish this, but if it's like a tomato, we'll at least know that. If it's a Magician of Faith, we get to know that they had Duo back to hand. Maybe we set both of our spells here. But unfortunately for us, it is the 4-star Ladybug of Doom, so that will pop the Witch. It makes me glad that I went for the Witch instead of the Rat, although what we could have done here instead of getting aggressive, we could have just set our monsters. And that would have played around this a bit. Although if our opponent did summon out something to beat over the Rat and then flipped up the 4-star Ladybug of Doom after, that could be pretty bad. But ultimately we do get a search here of a Kaiku, and I feel like it's pretty fine. We're going to set this Harpy's Feather Duster. They do have an MST for that, but that's kind of why I set the Harpy's Feather Duster. I figured it was going to trade either way with the back row. And if it was an MST, then it could be a good bluff, I guess. They're going to go for a Pot of Greed here. Set 1, switch the 4-star Ladybug of Doom to attack, summon out 7-card fish here, and get in for 2,600. A bit worrying there. And, it's kind of unfortunate that we don't have the Harpy's Feather Duster anymore, but we do have this MST here. Now, we could potentially play it a bit conservatively, just setting the Giant Rat. They'll have to hit into it with their monsters, and that could potentially be bad for them. Or we could get a little bit aggressive here, summoning out the Kaiku, Mystical Space Typhooning, their Swords of Villain Light, and hitting over the 4-star Ladybug of Doom. That is the play that I do end up going for. I mean, it is a bit risky, as there are potential combinations of cards that do end the game on the spot after this. But I feel like this is fine. I mean, if they crash their 7-card fish into the Kaiku and have another monster, we will take some more damage, but we do have Raigeki plus Rat for later. So I feel like it's okay doing this. The big fear is if they've got like a Change of Heart or Snatch Steal and they take our Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer and, have another monster to also win. And unfortunately, that is indeed what they've got. So yeah, that's just kind of unfortunate. But I do think that it was like potentially the right play to save the Raigeki for later. I mean, if we had set the Rat instead and given them the board that they had, they likely would have brought out the Injection Fairy Lily, and they probably would have hit into our Rat with the 7-card fish first. We would have been kind of forced to bring out Injection Fairy Lily. I mean, I guess we could have brought out another Rat. They'd pay 2,000. We'd take 2,000. It would equalize out that way, I guess. Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell what could have happened. They have a Call of the Haunted here as well, and they've got an Sura Priest. So actually, they might have just brought out a Sura Priest beaten through our lineup there. And yeah, I mean, it's tough to know what we could have done here differently. They've got Call of the Haunted as well to bring back monsters from grave if we had gone for the Raigeki. So I mean, I don't know. I think that ultimately we played this game fine. We kind of got blown out in game 3 here. And, again, maybe this is just not really having played the deck enough. Maybe later on, if I tested out this deck more, saying Giant Rat would have been the right play. But it's tough to tell at this point in the game. But those were the games. I hope that you enjoyed them as always. I do think that this deck is pretty neat, but it does have some major flaws. Creature Swap is always a 2-card combo, even though there are like basically 8 cards in your deck that work well with it. It is kind of a brick in some circumstances, and also it is disruptible by your opponent. Like, if your opponent has something like a weak monster on field in addition to a strong monster, then that can really disrupt your creature swap play. So I'm not sure how much I like it in the deck. I also think that playing a deck with 6 recruiters can be very good because Giant Rat can convert into an Injection Fairy Lily or an Exiled Force, and Tomato can convert into like Sanguines or Witches. They can also deck thin, which is very nice. But I do think that, if you draw a ton of recruiters, then you're in a pretty bad spot. It's just less impressive than what other decks can do with their monsters. So I don't necessarily think that the recruiter swap deck is bad, but I also don't think it's necessarily as good as like good stuff decks or gear free decks or like the all in on hand control Yata decks. So I think that this deck is probably like tier 2. Although I think, people can definitely prove me wrong in the future. I also think that, Giant Rat is a very strong recruiter, so we could potentially see good stuff decks in the future not play tomatoes at all, just playing the rats to get into your powerful Injection Fairy Lilies or Exiled Forces. And maybe that would be a more rat box focused deck in the future. However, I kind of wanted to cover this as a rat box and recruiter control and creature swap deck all in one. And so, yeah, I can't really speak to Ratbox on its own merits, but I do think that this game showed off some of these strengths and flaws of Ratbox in addition to the creature swap sort of deck. But I am very curious to hear all of your thoughts on these games down in the comments below. I always look forward to discussing them with you as always. Do you think that I'm sort of giving the recruiter swap deck a bad rap and that this deck is actually a lot better than I'm giving it credit for and that I just got unlucky and stuff? Or you think that, this deck actually is much worse than I'm saying, and the fact that you can side into things like 4-star Ladybug of Doom or Sure Priest to really hamper the strategy makes this deck a lot worse than tier 1. Let me know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this content, as always, please do subscribe. It really helps out the channel a lot. And we're almost 750 subscribers, which would be a major milestone to reach. So if you enjoy these videos and want to see when they come out, definitely subscribe. And also, if you enjoyed the video, also please do leave a like down below. But until next time, I've been Ben from Yu-Gi-Oh from Zero, and I'm signing off.